Hi everyone, my name is Daniel Nees and I was the director and lead artist on Bane, a Star Wars fan film which was released on the 4th of May for nerdy reasons. This is the director's commentary video, and ordinarily on a film as small as this you probably wouldn't worry about a video like this, but I think it's a good idea to talk about some of the behind the scenes stuff that you ordinarily wouldn't know about or wouldn't hear about, and to talk about the level of work that goes into something even as small as this. So without further ado, let's get on with it.
Peace is a lie.
Okay, so the peace is a lie line and all the other lines of dialogue that are in this film, and there aren't that many because it's quite short, but they're all lines from the Sith Code, which is sort of like the code of conduct for the Sith Order. And the Sith Order is sort of the opposite of the Jedi Order. They're the bad guys, generally. And the Sith Code was sort of a mantra for the character that we based this film on. Well, the book that we based this film on, the main character used it as a bit of a mantra throughout the story. So we wanted to structure this film around that because it was so important as part of the story. Okay, so this shot here, the planet shot, where the ship drops out of hyperspace in front of the planet. So this was a fairly troublesome shot throughout the course of the production, mainly because everyone seemed to have a different opinion as to whether or not it looked good. This was the look that I originally came up with, but there were about 5 or 6 different iterations of this shot, and this was the one that seemed to be the most liked overall. But it very easily could have gone a different direction, and that's just sort of goes to show the amount of different styles that a thing can go through before it ends up looking the way it ends up looking. Yeah, okay. So this series of shots has a couple of sort of amusing stories behind it. Originally because we had this great plane that we wanted to have in the film, like one of those sort of standard Star Wars shots where you have a speeder zipping across the big flat plain somewhere. In episode 7 it was Rey on her speeder at the start across the sand, and you got a similar thing in episode 4 where Luke's zipping along in his speeder, and they all actually, come to think of it, there's a lot of zipping across sand in Star Wars. So we wanted to have one of these great big expanses of flat land where a speeder can zip across in our film, and there's a great, fantastic place for this sort of thing called Lake George that is near where I live, and it's basically just a dry lake bed. Because it is technically private land, you're not really supposed to be on there, But because of how huge it is, and the fact that it floods all the time, that there's no houses anywhere. So there's no house you can go to and knock on the door and say, "Hey, do you mind if I film here real quick?" So, bit naughty. Probably wouldn't recommend this. Don't do this at home, kids, or at someone else's home, I suppose. But I hopped a fence and ran into Lake George, and I was running along the field with my phone trying to film a slower version of the sideways panning that you see in the film, but I was so terrified of being caught and getting arrested and sent to jail because I'm such a goody two-shoes, that I panicked a little bit and I didn't set up the settings on my phone properly, so the footage was pretty much unusable. It was a really low resolution video and I didn't have the nerve to go back and do it again, so we ended up just doing it in CG, and it worked pretty well. I think it looks quite good. So another funny story is that when we went to go buy these clothes, we had to go and get them in the morning so that we could film in the afternoon, so we didn't have a whole lot of time to try and find them. We ended up going to all these charity stores to try and, where people go and donate their clothes when they're done with them, because in that way the clothes are all sort of worn and used, we don't have to try and weather them ourselves, and it's cheaper that way as well. So we had to try and find suitable clothing in the limited range that these stores had, and he's a very tall guy. He's 6'3", 6'4", and he's broad and not skinny. So we needed large clothing, and they didn't have anything big enough. Like the vest that he's wearing in the film there is about 8 sizes too small. He could not do it up at all. It's basically like a bra on him. And the pants were 2 sizes too small. And he could not sit down in them without giving himself a hernia. So basically throughout the entire scene his fly's undone.
Through passion I gain strength.
Alrighty. Okay, so this is a good opportunity, I think, to talk about the importance of listening to your other team members. Because this is a great example of where someone else's input really did make a big difference. Originally, in the first shot, the one with the temple in the background and the big valley, I was originally just going to have the camera panning from left to right along the base of the valley, and you could see everything the entire time. And the guy who played Bane, Ashley Mears, had a really good suggestion, which was to have the camera sort of reveal the valley from behind a couple of rocks. And I think that really did produce a much nicer result, especially with the cut to black in the previous shots. It made a nice transition, and it really worked very well. And I wouldn't have thought of doing that, I don't think, by myself. Another thing to talk about in these shots is in the second shot, the one with the big doorway and all the rubble in front of it. That was originally going to look exactly as it ended up looking. About halfway through production, we had a few people suggesting that we have a creature of some description, some sort of an animal from the Star Wars universe making an appearance in the film somewhere. So I put a 3D artist, a very talented 3D artist, onto the task of making the Tukata creature, which is basically like a lizardy wolf thing that's been warped by the dark side of the Force. And yeah, so he made a very nice 3D model of that, and we put it into the shot, and then the shot was ruined. Not because he did a bad job, he did a very good job, but unfortunately it just could have killed the vibes of that particular shot. The thing that made that shot so good, I think, is that it's this big, dark, forbidding doorway with a lot of mystery sort of radiating from it. And as soon as we put the creature in there, it took all that mystery, all that forbidding atmosphere, and focused it on that creature, and it completely killed the mood. So that we didn't waste that artist's time, we ended up taking that creature and putting it as a statue in the valley shot that came before the one it was supposed to go in. And you can still see that creature model in the VFX breakdown video. There's a nice little turntable, and you can see the very high quality creature model that didn't end up getting used.
Through power I gain victory.
Okay, so this is a good example of how long something can take to make in this sort of work. I modeled that big ship myself. I actually did all the 3D work in this shot myself, but the big ship in particular took hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of 3D modeling, because every single thing on that ship is 3D geometry, computer generated 3D geometry, and yeah, many hours. Okay, so the fight scene. So we filmed the whole thing during the day, which you can see in the VFX breakdown video. The original footage was full sunlight. It would be much better if we got a cloudy day, because then the shadows aren't as harsh and it looks a little bit nicer, but unfortunately the only time we had available to film was on a particular day, and on that particular day it was full sunshine, so take what you can get. It was also very windy that day, which is frustrating for anyone who happens to be wearing a cloak while filming, and also for sound quality, but we weren't worrying about sound because we're just going to have music and not worry too much about the sound. But yeah, for people who are wearing cloaks, that's frustrating. It got some good shots where you get like this very dramatic cloak blowing in the wind sort of look, but for the poor guy who was playing Bane, he was facing away from the wind, so his back was to the wind, and that meant that his cloak kept on flapping forward and getting in his way. So we ended up taking his cloak off after that first shot because it was such a nightmare. There were several occasions where the guys, like in the first shot, the guys that are at the back, the two guys that get stomped by Bane throughout the course of the fight scene, they have hoods on their cloaks, and they were supposed to have them up. But the wind kept on blowing the flap down and into their faces, and then they couldn't see what they were doing, or the wind kept blowing the hoods off. Either way, it wasn't what we wanted, so we ended up just letting them have the hoods down, and it was fine. So we used several props during the course of the filming of the fight scene, and the main one was this one here. This metal lightsaber hilt, which is a very high quality prop that we had to purchase. The benefit of this one, aside from it looking like it's metal, because it is metal, is that it's a modular piece, which means that you can swap out sections, and we have this section as well, and we could swap this part of the lightsaber hilt here for this section, and it made a curved hilt, which is what the character from the books had, so we wanted to look like that. It also meant that we could use the same prop for multiple people, and it looked like a different hilt depending on who was holding it. So that was good. Multiple hilts for the price of one. We also had these plastic lightsabers that I had from when I was a kid. We have 3 of those here. And these were used whenever the actors were really swinging quite hard at each other, or if we had to throw one of these lightsabers across the field. It was a bit safer doing that than using the metal one. But these required that we take them out of the footage in post-production and then swap them out for a CG lightsaber, which was a bit more work, but it made it safer on set, and that's what's most important. So for a lot of these shots, particularly the ones where one of the actors is being frozen in midair, or being thrown across the field, or the lightsaber throw, all those ones were done with a technique that's known as split screen, which you may have seen in other films and post-production things, where basically you film one person doing something, then you cut, then you film another person doing something, and you stitch those pieces of footage together in post-production. So it looks like there's more than one person in the shot, but there's actually not. That's a technique that's used all the time in film, and we used it a lot whenever the timing needed to be perfect, or if someone was being thrown, or like stuff that required a lot of work on one part but not on another, or the timing needed to be perfect, or it was physically impossible for one thing to happen, or you know, stuff like that. It also allowed us to do things like with the lightsaber throw, we had the guy who got hit by the lightsaber throw himself to the ground in various different ways several times, which meant that we could take our pick of which falling pattern looked the best, and just and do the same thing with the throw. We had multiple takes of that, and we could pick which throw we liked best, which fall we liked best, time them perfectly, and stitch them together. So there were 3 different situations where we had to have an actor throw himself to the ground because he got hit by something, or he was thrown across the field, or something like that. And the actors that played those characters were very generous with their attitude. They were more than happy to repeatedly toss themselves to the ground. One guy, the guy who got thrown across the field, frozen and then thrown by Bane, the bit where he rolls across the ground, we filmed that about 8 times. So we made all the armor pieces of the costumes out of foam, and this is the piece worn by the guy that was thrown across the field, and he's a very lean fella. If I put this on, it's basically just a bra on me. It's but it's made out of foam mats that we got from like discount stores, and it's actually quite good padding as a side benefit, but it's very, very cheap. We had virtually no budget to work with, and we built the whole thing, all the costumes, for just a few dollars. You can see a few places where it ripped right through the foam though, when he tossed himself to the ground. side effect of rough housing in fragile costumes. The actors themselves, I think, did a very good job. We filmed a lot of this very quickly because we had done a lot of practice beforehand. These are mostly people I know from work, so in our lunch break at work we would go down to this park and practice the choreography over and over and over and over and over again. I think they got quite annoyed with me by the end of it because I kept insisting we go and practice again. But what it meant was that when we went to go and actually film the thing, we were very practiced. We knew what we were doing. It was very much a matter of just go in, this is the shot we're filming now, do it real quick, great, that worked. Move on to the next shot, do that one real quick. Yeah, every single one we did 2 or 3 takes at least, and the entire fight scene only took a couple of hours to film because we had practiced it so much and we knew what we were doing when we started filming. Well, thanks for watching this video. We hope you found it educational or entertaining or a mixture of both, who knows. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed so far. We really, really appreciate it, and all the positive feedback we've had for this film. Particularly for me, it's my first major piece. Even though it's fairly short, it was a lot of work, so we're glad so many of you liked it. We look forward to making more videos in the future. Stick around and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.